Welcome to this webinar, the second one about ALOps. If you attended the previous one, then you might remember that I asked at the end of the webinar what topics you would like to handle next time. And dependencies was by far the most requested topic. So I actually decided to go for that one for this webinar. It is already a little bit advanced. So we are skipping a few, let's say, introduction topics in this case, but I'm sure that's okay. If you have questions, there is a moderator. But yeah, before we go there, I do have a slide on that actually about housekeeping. So there is a moderator. And most knowledgeable on ALOps because he is one of the main developers. He will be able to answer your question, get feedback. If you have ideas or improvements or anything like that, he will be able to answer that. Me, Erik Wouters, or Waldo, I will be doing this webcast. And yeah, we did not enable audio because we have 100 people that registered for this webcast. I don't think that that would kind of like turn into a chaos. So let's not do that. But as said, there is a chat for you available for you to provide feedback and questions. If you missed our first video, we do make everything available on YouTube. This link that you see at the end of this slide is a direct link to our YouTube channel. Obviously, there's only one YouTube yet, or one video only available. This one will be made available as well. I'm not going to bother you with some specifics and some marketing and things about ALOps. I would like to refer to that first video on the channel. The idea is for all next videos that we will do and webinars that we will do will actually only going to be about the content, the interesting stuff, let's say. So today, as said, dependencies is going to be the main topic, absolutely the main topic. But before we go there, I do want to handle, and it was also quite a highly requested topic, I do want to handle release pipelines a little bit. So I will start a little bit because it is actually a continuation on what we did the previous time, where I did an introduction on build pipelines. The next thing of build pipeline is obviously an introduction of release pipeline. So I would like to start with that. Next, I will handle dependencies quite deeper. And I will end with the third most requested topic, a few tips and tricks on what you can do in terms of app versioning and how you can handle versioning your apps. All right. So let's go a little bit into release pipelines. Release pipelines, we talk about release pipelines in the terms of continuous delivery. You know the CI/CD part. CI was the continuous integration. Continuous integration is where you have a build pipeline managing the fact that multiple developers merges code into some kind of branch, whatever your branching strategy is. The CD part is the continuous delivery. Whatever the build pipeline has created, let's say an artifact. In terms of Business Central, it would probably be an app. It needs to be delivered somewhere. Let's say publish an app on a test environment or some kind of user test environment or some kind of live environment. And that's something that we can automate. That's something that we should automate. Just imagine what I see lately a lot is a lot of partners to deploy an app on to deploy an app on SaaS that they're using the manual upload process. like from the client. This is like losing time. I mean, you can automate that, and that is typically a delivery project, delivery pipeline. Let's quickly go into that. I lost my browser. Let me open my browser again. Here it is. So what I talked about last time, let me show you that again. The introduction. By the way, this link is public. You are able to look into the projects that I show during the webcast. So last time we built a pipeline, just an introduction pipeline, where we had a repository with an app and a test app. And we set up a pipeline based on the examples that you could find on our GitHub. And that was it. The pipeline, what it actually does, it checks a lot, it tests a lot, and together with that, it builds artifacts. Now, what we will talk about now is how we can use these artifacts to release to some kind of test system, a system. Yeah. So let's go into the project I've set up for this webcast. In this project, I have multiple repositories. We will talk about that, a few scenarios about Dependencies app. But as said, I also will talk about release pipeline. So the idea is we have artifact or multiple artifacts, or at least something that came out of a build pipeline, and we want to release that to some kind of environment. And you can already see here that I've set one up. It's going to be about scenario number 3. Again, that's for later. The idea of a release pipeline is, first of all, you gather the artifacts from, in our case, some kind of build pipeline, and then you define in which environment you would like to publish them. Let me just quickly create a new pipeline to show you how we can do that. I will create an empty job because basically you will not find too much templates that has anything to do with Business Central, at least not in my knowledge. So I will create an empty job, and you see 2 steps that we need to define. Left step is the artifacts. So I need to gather my artifacts somehow, and the stages, actually the different steps that I would like for a decent release process. This could be like automated testing, then manual testing, then user testing, and then live environment, which would be 4 stages. Just to simplify it a little bit, I will just do 1 stage just to show you what the idea is behind a release pipeline. This is an introduction after all, right? So left part, I define the artifacts. In my case of Business Central, I define the apps. So I add, for instance, my first app. In my case, I might want to deliver 5 apps or 10 apps. Depends a little bit on what you want to do. In my case, let's say I want to deliver all the artifacts from 2 pipelines. So I've got my pipeline over here. This pipeline we will talk about while we talk about dependencies, by the way. The idea is this pipeline builds artifacts, and that's the artifact that I need. Maybe I need a second artifact from a second pipeline. In my case, yes, I do have a second pipeline with the dependent app in this case. And I want that as well. Just a small tip, name them decently so it is very clear to see which artifacts you're talking about. So in my case, this would be a base app, and the other one is called actually a fin app. So what I know at this case is that base is some kind of library app that the fin is dependent from. Okay, and I gathered 2 artifacts, both from a different build pipeline. What I can do now is set up the steps where I would like to publish them. Last time in our introduction about build pipelines, we already talked about a build agent, how to set up a build agent. Well, this part where I will set up where to deploy them, we also need an agent, a DevOps agent that can handle my steps that I will define. The idea is if you would like to deploy this to a test server, you would be able to set up an agent on that test server that can handle these artifacts to be published to this test server. The same for a live environment, where you would be able to set up this to a live environment. So let's just say this is a test environment, quality assurance, the agent. And this is where you can set up that agent pool. Remember from our last webinar that we handled agent pool, how we set up an agent pool. Well, this is just such an agent pool. And that's actually it. Now I only need to define what steps I would like this agent to execute. So it's actually quite simple. If you have a test environment, just an NST running, the only thing that you want to do is publish your apps there, right? So what you could do with ALOps is just use the publish step. This publish step is, by the way, one of the steps we already used in the build pipeline to publish our app to be able to test, for instance, and to run the tests. Now, in this case, we use the same step in the release pipeline, which obviously, again, is going to publish the apps. So the only thing that we should do is define the server instance, and that's it. It will publish all the apps. In this case, I will have an app and a test app being published. If you do not want to publish the test app, you can obviously play with the app filter. For instance, if your app would end with or has base in it and would end with app, for instance, then you would be able to filter whatever that makes a certain filter unique to the app that you would like to publish. In essence, what you did now, you created, I created that these two artifacts will be gathered from the build pipeline, and then this step will be executed. Obviously, now it's going to basically just publish all apps. Yeah. Let me now show you. I will not save this. I will show you one that I have set up already. So you see here a few more steps and already a few releases being created. Now, a release is simply being created either by an automatic trigger or manually. So if I would create one release manually here, remember what I would have set up. First of all, gather me some artifacts, and second of all, push them through some kind of server by letting the agent execute the steps that I defined in these different stages. So if I would do that now, create a release, and I will just create a default release. What it does, it builds me a release number 7 in this case. And what it will do, it will obviously gather the artifacts. You see here a base app and a fin app. In this case, you actually get the exact version of the artifact that it gathered from the latest build, successful build, obviously, that it could find. Yeah, and it's already deploying that to my test server for Holland, and it will automatically do that to the test server for Belgium. And you can already see probably there is going to be some kind of approval process for me to be able to approve after I've tested it, to approve it to some kind of live customers. Now, the way I set this up, let me edit the pipeline, sorry. Again, the two phases. First of all, I gather my artifact. And in this case, I basically just said quite the same that I already did. For this project, this pipeline get me the latest from the master branch. In my branch policy, branch strategy, apparently the master branch is the one and only master that I would like to release, the stable branch, let's say. Depends a little bit on the branch strategy that you apply. If you have a Git flow, you probably, then master might make sense. If you have a release flow, then you might want to release from another branch or release branch. Depends a little bit. That's how you want to set it up. In any case, in my case, what I want to do is gather a stable app from the master branch. The same I do for the Fin app. This is a different pipeline. Again, we get it from a specific branch being the master branch. Okay. And you can see here some kind of lightning whatever it is. Now, what you could do is automatically advance to the next steps. That's basically what continuous deployment is. So what I could do is, like, whenever there is a new Fin app, that's why it's on this one, please automatically deploy it to the next stage. In my case, to the test for Belgium and the test for Holland. Yeah. If you don't want to do that, create a release automatically by a new artifact. You would be able to set a schedule, like, for instance, create a release every day. We have one customer, for instance, where we release every morning at 5 o'clock. And what it will do is gather about 10 artifacts from the apps, 10 apps, and that we will release every morning at 5 o'clock. So every morning, the consultants have a new version of whatever has been developed the previous day. Developed and pull requested and code reviewed, obviously. Yeah. So that is the artifact part. And then the next is I've set up 5 tasks in this case. Yeah. This is probably something you won't do, but for me, it was actually easy to have some kind of agent. I have one agent, again, this Waldo agent. This is actually here, right here. This is actually my my environment. This is the same environment that I showed last time where I installed that agent. And what I did here, I actually used 5 steps from ALOps, where I set up a Docker container, import license, and then publish the 2 artifacts. You see here the base artifact and the Fin artifact, which is dependent from the base artifact. What I do here is actually a special. I am using a special parameter from ALOps, being the fixed container tag. And in this case, I actually make sure that if there is a container with this tag, I will reuse that container and basically just not create a new one. I will import the license, but I will use, again, you see that this container tag is used in every single step. I will basically just publish the base app and the Fin app in this container. So I am able to, if the container doesn't exist, create me a test container and publish both apps at the same time. So if everything is fine, I actually didn't check that too much, Docker PS, then I have 2 containers running. One with the Holland localization and one with the Belgian localization. And these are the 2 containers basically, which could be my test environments, right? I'm doing the same for this one. Same 5 steps. By the way, small tip, there is a clone button here. So if you would have like a German test environment, it's quite simple. Just create a new, clone it. The 5 steps will be cloned. Set it up. Sorry, that's definitely not where you need to set that up. Here, that it is after the release, and then basically you have the same as with the other localizations. Obviously, change the Docker container to a German one. All right, I will delete this one. Next steps here, as I said, I might want to introduce some kind of approval. If I go back to the release that I created, in the meantime, it should already have been released. So my test environment for Belgium and test environment from Holland have got a new app. And I do have now the ability to approve these artifacts as being tested manually in this case, right? If I would press approve, again, this could be another agent on another server that is being executed. But again, with these artifacts that I've been testing in 2 isolated environments. Yeah, if I would approve, then it is going to execute that for this environment and basically just release both apps in a live environment for this customer, for instance, just an example. So, importing apps manually or with PowerShell? No, absolutely not. Everything can be managed and should be managed, in my opinion, with DevOps. So if you go back, how did we set this up? Basically, what we did is an approval, right? And that's what we call in DevOps a pre-approval or pre-deployment approval, whatever it's called, a pre-deployment approval. So basically what I only say is at this point here, okay, maybe this is done, but before you push it here, I would like to block it. And in this case, me can approve it in that environment. Okay, that's the only thing you need to set up, the user and the fact that you want to enable the pre-deployment. The trigger is obviously done after stage, so I would like to execute this after the test BE stage. That's it. It's a matter of seconds to set this up. And let's go back maybe to the release, and now, yeah, it has been successfully released. And that is, as far as an introduction is concerned, an introduction to releases. The idea is that you are able to release and set this up however you want. I mean, in the background, it's just all PowerShell, right? If you would like to automatically start running automated tests and report your automated tests in a release stage, it is fine. If you would like to import the test up, take a backup of the live environment and execute some data tests at the same time, you are able to do that. It's all just a matter of finding a way in PowerShell, finding a way in ALOps to set this up. If you have specific questions or specific feedback or ideas on topics that we would need to handle specifically for release pipelines, please let us know. There will be an evaluation after this webinar, and you are able to enter ideas there or just provide them in the chat, and Bart will take a note of them. Okay, main topic of today was dependencies. So I prepared 4 scenarios for you. First of all, just one app with its test app, where the test app obviously is going to depend on the main app. Now, this is mainly a topic on test-driven development, and you will see that whenever you will do test-driven development, you will apply you will at least have one dependency. Second is, if you have multiple apps, could be 3, could be 30. I recently saw a partner with 44. So if you have multiple apps, you might want to compile them all at the same time. So you might want to make them dependent, or sorry, you make them part of just one repository in DevOps. And then you need to be able to create a pipeline that handles that. So I got the scenario on that, not for 44 apps, only for 3. Then we have another one where we would have like 44 apps, but not handle that in one big repository. By the way, one big repository of 44 apps will delay quite a lot to build. It will be a big build. We could also handle them as all independent apps. So how do we handle dependencies while the apps are divided over multiple repositories? And then last but not least, what I see a lot is partners working with ISV apps. And at some point, I want to be dependent from an ISV app. So how can I handle that? So I created, for these 4 scenarios, I created at least 4 build pipelines, actually 5 build pipelines. And let's go into scenario number 1. As I said, this is actually the scenario where we touch the test-driven development. So the fact that one app is always accompanied by another app, because in test-driven development, any kind of change in code should be tested. If you do it changing code that cannot be tested, then basically you shouldn't be doing this change in code, because it is not really behavior in business logic. I know there probably are reasons to not test, but in a way, in test-driven development, you should always test what you change. The idea is that you basically just develop a test environment together with live environment, trying to find my scenario here. So what we have here, for instance, is 2 apps, but actually just 1 app, and it's test app, right? And I must say, Business Central does quite a good job, or let's say the compiler does quite a good job in handling dependencies in a multi-root workspace. This is, by the way, something I'm planning to blog about very recently, because when you see, for instance, this is an internal app we're working on. Actually, this app is, or this product is the collection of multiple apps. And what you see here is basically multiple workspaces, test app, unit tests, and a global test, and so on and so on. So what actually the AL compiler is really capable of doing is handling that. In this case, for instance, I just deleted the base app where the test app is dependent on. If I would recompile the base app, you will see that automatically the symbols are being updated for the test app, and here it is. Basically meaning if you have multiple workspaces open in a multi-root workspace, the compiler is actually pretty smart in picking up the dependencies. Even I now compile to make the symbol available. I even didn't have to compile. With the later versions of the compiler, they're able to already pick up the new code from other workspaces. So this is actually quite interesting. Now, this is actually just nothing to do with DevOps, obviously, but knowing this makes it a lot easier to work with dependencies. When we need to do for DevOps is just make them part of one repository. And that is actually what we do. And why one repository? Because we need to compile them at the same time, right? When we build the app, we need to run the test, and the test needs to be updated while we update the business logic. So this test app and the app itself is actually just one big pile of code that we need to handle at the same time in one build pipeline. So what we have here, just one repository with an app and its test app. The steps that we will execute there is we will set up Docker, we will install the previous version of the app. Why that is, I will tell you at the end of this webinar. And then we will compile. Now, do know that the ALOps compile step will download symbols, compile, and then upload the artifact as an artifact, upload the app as an artifact of the build pipeline. Then I will compile and run tests, and then remove Docker. In DevOps, this is pipeline number 1, right? And it looks something like this. Obviously, all ALOps steps. I already talked about how to make license files available in the previous video. Well, I've set up a variable group for that. I will only run this pipeline when I update the master branch. Basically, this is the continuous integration part. I set up Docker. That was my step number 1. I will use this image and I will wait for it. Yeah, same as last webinar. I will import license. This step is actually because I will be running tests. I need to import the test apps that Microsoft made available. I am using test libraries. I am using the library insert and so on. So I need to import that, and ALOps make that a little bit easier just by referring to the right names of the apps that are already on the Docker container. Next, as I said, I will import the previous version of my app. Again, I will not go into that now, but do know this is actually a very important step for you in a build pipeline. Again, this will be handled at the end of, of the webinar. I will compile the app. And here you see that I do a few funky things. First of all, I point to the app folder within my repository. If I open my repository for the first one, the first scenario, you will see I have an app folder and a test folder, right? And in this app folder, I do have an app.json. This is the app, and this is the test app for the app. So I will be first compiling the app. So I'm referring actually to this target project and even give the app a suffix. This is actually quite important later on when you release in your release pipeline. If you really want to point to the app file and want to leave out the test app, the suffix is actually a way to do that. You will be able to filter something like, okay, I need the app.app. So this makes sure that any kind of app file that ends with an app as a suffix will be an actual app and not a test app. Okay, and I will publish that. Do know that when you use the ALOps apps publish, you will automatically also remove the app that you published. This is just to make sure that you don't publish one app twice, and makes it a little bit easier in next steps that you can again use star.app. You will know that you don't republish the one that you just compiled. So in this case, I refer obviously to test. I will give it a suffix as well, just for later to be able to refer to some kind of app artifact, and publish that again. In this case, I published the main app and the test app, so I'm ready to run my tests. Yeah, this is just a default step from ALOps that is able to just run tests. I do want to fail when there is an error, and I want to publish test result as well. Again, this is also a very simple default step that is always the same. Copy it from the template. This one as well, copy it just from the template, and you never need to worry about not working. All in the end, I will remove Docker container. Don't forget this one, by the way, condition always. Basically meaning that if a pipeline failed at some step, it will always execute this one. And obviously for removing some kind of temporary container, you do want to always remove that. You don't want to just leave it there hanging because you will be able to build like 3 or 4 failing builds, and then your server is completely swamped. So don't forget this one. All right. So this is actually handling the simplest of scenarios, test-driven development, having one test app accompanied with your app, which is already a form of dependencies. The next one is a little bit, more extensive, but quite the same, where we have multiple apps. These are just 3 apps, I know, but this could be 30 apps. Okay. And what we will do here is all dependencies, we will set up Docker and install previous version. Again, I will not talk about that yet, but then we define in the build pipeline the right order. We actually already did that in the previous example, where we imported the main app and the test app in the right order. Now we will just extend that with the fin app, the financials app, which is dependent from the base app, and the test app, which is dependent from both. Yeah, the order is important, like you see in the right screenshot here as well, that it will first compile and publish the base app, then compile and publish the fin app, and then compile and publish the test app. I'm sure you believe me that this works, and if you don't believe me, do know that you can check yourself, because also this project is a public project. Let me quickly show you. So this URL you can basically just use. I might change this URL, by the way, because I don't like this %20 might be common on the score in the next couple of days. I'm just saying. In any case, you might wonder, like, look, this is not really flexible or generic, because if I would add a dependency, then I need to change my build pipeline. And yes, that is the case. And I must admit that that is kind of like intentional, because in my opinion, and please provide me feedback if you do not share that opinion, because if you need a generic way to publish your apps, we will foresee a generic way to publish or to compile the apps in the right order. But in my opinion, dependencies is something you need to be conscious about. And if anyone would just create a dependency, if any developer would just create a dependency because they think they need it, then I would like to be notified, either by a changed build pipeline or a non-changed build pipeline, which is failing at that point. For me, dependencies should only be created when you're absolutely sure you need that dependency. And maybe because, in our case, for instance, we have been created not one dependency, but made them into 2 dependencies, just because we didn't want to create that one-on-one dependency. If you want to really create independent apps, you might want to what we call create a connector app that connects 2 apps. That makes 2 apps still dependent, but this connector app would basically just handle the integration of the 2 apps. And this kind of, well, how do you say that in English? You need to think about these things. And yeah, that's why I just don't want to handle dependencies in a generic way, like, look, ALOps will solve whatever dependency tree is out there. No, not yet. But again, we do like to have your input on that. If you really think it's important, we will add that. All right. Scenario number 3. This is actually my most preferred scenario, because in this scenario where we had multiple apps, let's say 30, all of these 30 apps will need to be built at some point, and that takes time. While I might have done just a small change in one of the apps, why do I need to build all the other apps as well? If you split them over multiple repositories, you can handle them differently. Probably you can do that with this very special kind of pipeline as well. Yeah, what I would like to do is, in my opinion, an app is dependent. And if an app breaks a dependency of another app, it's not a problem of the app itself, but from the dependent app. So sure, you need to be notified by the dependent app that, hey, my dependency is broken. And that's where we have scheduled build pipelines or other build pipelines. Yeah, but in any case, this makes obviously that multiple apps can be handled completely separately. We probably need to set up a lot of build pipelines. In my case here, I have 2 repositories, a base repository, a test repository, all with its tests. and I completely messed up here. I completely messed up here because this is actually the base test. This is the fin test. Dependencies are okay in this case. So base with its test app, the fin with its test app. Yeah, 2 repositories because fin is also dependent on base. In this case, you need 2 pipelines, one for base, one for fin. Both look very similar. And if you look at the white steps, they are all the same. But obviously, the fin need to install the base app to be able to compile and publish. Because remember, compile will download the symbol files and then compile and then publish the app as an artifact. So I need to make my base app available in the fin pipeline. That's why this red step is actually the only one that is different from the other one. So in my case, scenario number 3 has 2 pipelines. One for the base app, yeah, and this one will basically just run default what we have seen in scenario number 1. And this is almost the same, but it will download build artifacts from the base app. Maybe I can show you that. So this is where it will download the base app and publish that base app. Yeah, from this moment, the base app is part of the Docker container that I set up here and will be taken into account when I will compile my fin app, which is this one, the dependent app, because the symbols are there, because I published it. Very simple. Again, this is my most preferred way of working. We have set up a dependency tree of about 15 apps with this. So one project, 15 apps. Each app has its test app, so basically it's 30 apps. The nice thing about this is also very easy to handle unit tests. In my opinion, if you want to do unit test, the unit test should be executed on the app where that it tests, not in combination with all the apps being published, because I might want to publish the app without all the apps at the same time. So there's a big difference between unit tests and integration tests. And if I may show that, go back here. So you see here, for instance, that this base app has got an app and test app. So this base app is a good example because this is not dependent on anything, just on the base application, obviously, from Microsoft. But if I would install the fin app, a lot of these base tests will fail because, yeah, simply said, if the fin app would show a message with the base that the base app does not expect, then the test fails. So for running the tests, in my opinion, the base needs to have a different pipeline than the fin. The fin cannot be installed without the base, right? So the fin has its test with base, but not with all the other apps, right? So for unit testing, what we always do, we just set up a container specifically, a build pipeline specifically for the app itself, and not just with all the apps installed. If you just have a build pipeline with the app and all its dependents. So for the base, it's just no other app. For the fin, it's fin and base. For sales purge, it's sales purge and base, not fin, right? And then all in the end, we have this one here, which is the test app, which is an app for the integration tests, right? And in this case, we would create, and you can see that in the app JSON, basically dependent on every single app that we have. So to be able to build this app, you will create a build pipeline that will download all these artifacts from all these build pipelines. Yeah. and then we'll run all the tests. Yeah. But for testability, yeah, there is a lot to say about that. I just want to show you on how we can handle that and structure that in build pipelines, being a separate repository and a build pipeline per collection of app and test. Yeah, and then maybe it's interesting to show you that is VS Code, although to show you the dependent app build pipeline, where we will use the download build artifact. It's not an ALOps step, it's just a default step from DevOps where you're able to download the build artifact. And if you will click to settings, you will see, well, you don't really see, that from this project, this build pipeline, which is the base app, that the dependent app will download the latest successful artifact from, and that's the one that it will depend from. Yeah, it will download that artifact and publish it. From that moment, the base app is in my Docker container, and that means I will be able to compile and publish the fin app, which is basically dependent from my base app. Yeah. Okay. Last but not least, ISV apps. Apps you don't have the code base from, basically. Well, a possibility would be to make them available in your repository. So in one repository, you have like a folder. Let me show you that. I always open the wrong folders. Sorry about that. So scenario number 4. You have a separate folder. Again, we have this app and test app. You will test-driven development. You always have a test app. But in this case, you have a separate folder with all the apps. In my case, just one. Again, this base app. You can already guess this is the fin app. In this case, the fin app will not be dependent from any kind of other build pipeline or anything here. It will be dependent from this app file here. Let's just call this an ISV app that I got from an ISV. Right, you will always be dependent from a certain version of symbols. Well, these are those symbols. This is the app that I need to be dependent from. This can obviously be an ISV app. This could be some of the collections of what you have. However, you would like to handle that. In any case, the idea would be that app files are now part of the repository, and I need to be able to publish app files from a certain folder. In short, the steps would be publish the ISV steps as a build artifact and install the ISV apps as well on the Docker container. Now, why this step 2 is important is because you probably would like to also release this to a test environment or whatever. So to be able to release that, remember at the beginning of this webinar that we wanted for the release pipeline, it gathers the build artifacts. Well, we can simply make this folder and every app in this folder be part of those build artifacts. And if I go to the build pipeline, you will see that is a simple step. This one, publish pipeline artifact. Again, a default artifact. Default step that is available from DevOps that you can just use in any kind of YAML. And what I simply point here is to the target path.apps. I give that a name, and from that moment, the ISV apps are part of the pipeline. So you'll see here that I do have my ISV apps, which include hello. Let me show it here. Okay, let me show it nowhere. Apparently, I'm not able to show that anymore. My apologies. Here they are, finally. So that the Waldo app base is part of. It is still clicking while I'm not clicking. Sorry about that. But in any case, you can just make the apps that is just actually part of your code, part of the artifacts, and you actually want that because you want to release them as well. You want to publish those apps at some point as well, even before you want to publish your own apps. Okay, so this is completely something different. So let me try to go back. I will close this because this is behaving completely badly. Let me go back to the pipeline of my fourth scenario, edit. So I upload them as artifacts, but I will also publish them. And this is an ALOps step that will again publish apps to a container. And in this case, I will use the batch publish folder, which is basically just again the .apps folder. And what ALOps will do is will figure out the dependencies and will automatically import the apps the right order. Okay. Next, I will compile and publish my app. That's going to be the fit app in this case, and then the test, obviously, and run the tests again. You'll see a lot of YAML files will be quite the same all over the place. All right, that was actually it on dependent apps. There's probably a lot more to say. And as like for instance, what I already said, like a lot of parts of these build pipelines are the same on a lot of YAML files. You could handle that a little bit different, where I would like to show you a small example. What we do internally is we work with pipeline templates. If I would go to actually an existing. So I'm just quickly going to show you the YAML that we are using. So what we do here, we point to templates. So we actually use one YAML to point to another YAML. Yeah, so these are just all possibilities that you would be able to do. Is just to be able to just code once and refer later. So one line here could be like 5 or 6 steps in a separate YAML, and it just makes your YAML a little bit better to control in a more generic way. Now, these are all possibilities that I would like to dive into in next webinars. There are just a few more things, and I have 5 minutes to show you that. It's versioning of apps. It's one of the topics that that you wanted me to talk about. Well, it's quite simple actually. A YAML or a build pipeline can version your apps, or basically should version your apps. Every single app that is being created into an artifact should have a version number that is higher than the previous build pipeline. Yeah. The idea is that you obviously should use the build number. Every single build in Azure gets a new number. Yeah, that's always a higher number. So this was build 102, build 103, build 108. So but you see that I'm using something else here as well. That is actually year and week. So what we did with ALOps, that we made actually in the compile step an extra parameter, nav-app versioning, of nav-app version, sorry, that you can set up to a specific version number, and you have a few options that you can use. Any kind of .NET reference, I just give the example year and week because I like that personally, but you could use date, day, or whatever. I've put here a link to all the date formatting that you would be able to use. What you can do as well is use an asterisk, which refers to the build number, and that is actually what you have seen here. This is the build number. So probably in our setting, we have set it at the end, an asterisk at the end of the version number. And there is also a question mark, and the question mark is actually the original from the app.json. So if you would like developers to choose versioning, what you could do in this case, for instance, the 1.0 is now hard-coded in the YAML. What you could do is question mark dot question mark, and then it will get the question marks or those two places, those two numbers from the app.json. And then you can basically mix and match some parts of the app.json and some parts of the build pipeline, an automatic versioning. So in this case, you will see that let me show you this again. That the version number 1.0.week number.build number is being set up in the pipeline on the variable for the compiler being this one. Yeah, and you can see for the test app we use the same versioning. That's app versioning, as simple as that, just to compile that. Then, last but not least, breaking changes. Now, as I said, I will skip this download artifact step to the last. Well, the one step that I've skipped a few times, let me go back to that first one, for instance. This step, where I would download the previous version of the app, which basically is a download build artifact, which basically is, okay, from my build pipeline and I'm executing now, get me the previous successful one, and take those artifacts and publish them. Yeah, that's actually when you, in that case, you make sure that whatever you're building now in the Docker container, there's already your previous version of whatever you're building now. Yeah. So this build pipeline, just one app and test app, you will see that it is not this one, by the way, this one. Yeah. So you will download your own previously successful build artifacts and publish them. Yeah. In that case, what you will do in this step, when you have compiled and built a new version with a new code of your app and publish them, ALOps will automatically not install the app, but upgrade the app. So in that case, if you would have done a breaking change, this is the time you will get your error message. Yeah. So simply add those two steps and you include an extra test, not just a compile test and a test or a running test. You also have a breaking change test, which is, I can tell you that, very, very valuable in any kind of build pipeline. Just imagine that you have multiple customers of the same app, and a new customer is able to use the app with a breaking change, but now you want to upgrade an old customer and you have a breaking change. This is very difficult to overcome. Breaking changes are something to avoid, and yeah, you are able to add just two simple steps in your build pipeline to download from my previous one and just make sure that is available before I compile and publish the one that I'm building at the moment. Yeah. And breaking changes, as for today, as far as I know at least, are not supported in SaaS either way. All right. that brings me to the end of the webinar, almost in time, and 1 minute overtime. Sorry about that. Next webinar is scheduled to be, and this should be the right date, by the way, being the 9th of March, and it's a little bit up to you to see what you want to hear. So there will be an evaluation at the end of this webinar. When I close this webinar, please fill it out and let me know what you would like to see. Also give me some feedback if this was too fast or too slow or just right or something else, then please let me know. And that's basically all that's left for me to say is thank you very much to make it until the end. You're awesome. And see you next time.